Hello, Internet. Welcome to episode 280 of the Comic Watchers Show. He's Chad. I'm Matt. We are here to talk comics this evening with the one and only David Pepose. How the heck are you, David?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to talk all things comics with you tonight.
Yeah, well, comics, yes. But specifically, I would love to start with 10-ton Titan Terrier, which I know I'm going to mess up at some point or another because of all those T's. But and by the way,
alliteration.
It's been such a fun book to work on, and really something that's been a long time coming. For those who aren't familiar with 10-ton Titan Terrier, it's the log line is it's Pokemon meets Pacific Rim. A meteor crashes into Earth, and it's got a clutch of kaiju eggs as well as an alien battle suit. And the only creature on Earth capable of turning the suit on is an 11-inch tall terrier. So it's about sort of this terrier and her scientist owner sort of having to learn the ropes all over again now that she's in control of a 10-ton battle suit. And hopefully together they will figure out a way to save the world. It's my first all ages book. If you're watching The Incredibles, or Pixar movies of that genre, Terrier is the perfect book for you. If you like Godzilla, if you like the Iron Giant, if you're just a fan of kaiju or giant robots or just a dog lover, this is a perfect book, whether you're 5 or 95.
I love it.
Go ahead. Is this based on is the dog or main character based on your fur baby?
Dog. Yes. I wrote this book. This book's been a long time coming. I've been working on it since actually pre-COVID. And it was semi-autobiographical in the fact that Holly, the terrier hero of our book, was based on a real dog, my real terrier Holly, who passed just like 2 weeks before the COVID shutdowns. And I wrote this book as sort of my way of, she was diagnosed with melanoma the summer before COVID. Mm-hmm. And so as I was taking Holly to her appointments and her radiation treatments, I felt so powerless. And I thought, I'm not sure if I can save my dog, but I can make her immortal. And so I really felt like this book really encapsulated just that big personality and that tiny little body, this very feisty, mischievous, good-humored, ultimately stubborn as hell, but also ultimately deeply loyal dog. That's Holly to a T. And I feel like Ornella Greco and I really kind of summed up the real life Holly's personality beautifully. As I've said in other interviews, this book really it's the perfect tribute to the perfect pup.
Aww. That's awesome, dude. So I guess nature of the beast being what it is, it sort of lends itself to being an all ages book.
Yeah.
Were there any particular challenges or hurdles in shifting your mind to writing for all ages?
I'm going to say that this is like the completely other side of the spectrum of the devil that wore my face.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think that's actually a big reason why I wrote this book, which is I felt like a lot of people know me for my darker material, stuff like Spencer and Locke, the OZ, I've written The Punisher. And I felt like for me, writing something for an all ages audience, it felt like the missing food group in a lot of ways. Just in that, I try to write for the convention in mind, thinking about what do I have on my table that can appeal to a wide range of an audience. And historically, I've always had young kids come up and try to read Spencer and Locke because they see the big cat guy on the cover, and I have to be the guy who says, "Oh, I'm sorry, this book isn't age appropriate." So having a book that isn't dumbing down or talking down to readers. I mean, I'm a third generation comics fan. I was 5 years old when I read Amazing Spider-Man 346, and that wasn't dumbed down. That wasn't watered down for kids. That felt like I was being invited to the big kid table. And so that's something I really wanted to do with a book like Terrier, is to have a book that I can hand to any reader without feeling any sort of guilt or shame about it. And at the same time, sort of, get to invite them into the club a little bit, to say like, hey, this is something that you can read and have a lot of fun. This is something your parents can read with you and have a lot of fun. And I think by sort of playing straight with those readers and playing fair with them and saying like, hey, like, we're not giving you the diet version. We're just giving you something that, isn't going so far into the darkness that, you can't read it. I think that's ultimately a value add for the industry. And I think to answer your other question about like, was this challenging to write for this different mode, this different tone? Honestly, it was kind of freeing in a lot of ways. I have written dark and gritty books before, but you often, for me at least, you have to justify that. You really do have to like kind of take a bunch of extra steps to justify, why am I doing this dark book? Why am I adding grit to it? Because otherwise it's just sensational. The sensationalist, it's shock value for the sake of shock value. So I think, being able to do sort of these lighter books, I personally enjoy that. I think that kind of speaks more to who I am as a creator. I loved writing Fantastic Four for the 2 issues that I wrote it. I've loved writing the Avengers, in the digital series that I've written them in, or Spider-Man. I like those kind of hopeful characters. And so being able to kind of do something that reminds both the industry at large that there's more to me than just dark books, but also just, I don't know, it feels very freeing, I think. I don't necessarily feel like I was straitjacketed in terms of like not writing like super hardcore stuff. I think if anything, it allowed me to kind of lean into my favorite parts of storytelling, which is the hope and the optimism, and just sort of inviting everybody to the table. And I feel like if Terrier is a book that younger readers come to know me by, I'll say that I've done my job pretty well.
Excellent.
So who are some of the other characters, in the book besides, the main Terrier?
Yeah. So our series kind of focuses on Holly, our title Terrier, but also her owner Sam, who is kind of this young scientific prodigy who joins the Planetary Elite Protectorate, which is sort of this governmental organization that's trying to figure out what's going on with this increasing wave of kaiju attacks. And so, Sam, in a lot of ways, is sort of a little bit of a stand-in for me, and sort of my sometimes dysfunctional relationships that I've had with my pets that can be a little codependent, that can be a little indulgent, and sort of figuring out, it's one thing when you can kind of pick the dog up when they're 15 pounds if they're misbehaving or being mischievous. It's a very different scenario when they're piloting a 10-ton alien battle suit. And so there's a little bit of that Ash and Pikachu kind of dynamic between the two of them as they're sort of navigating this old, deep, loyal relationship that is sort of, evolved in a little bit of a way. And so there needs to be some degree of structure. There needs to be some degree of training, but also ultimately remembering that no matter what kind of mischievous antics that Holly gets into, it's all rooted in love and loyalty. And ultimately, even before she gets the suit, she's the one who will stand in front of her owner and try to protect him, even from, kaiju that are, 10,000 times her size. I think, and then I think going on with our supporting cast, we have Penny, who is sort of Sam's kind of rival, but also like his only friend at the Protectorate. She's another kind of young prodigy whose father, General Armstrong, is sort of the head of this initiative.
Mhm.
And so, General Armstrong is kind of like, he's gruff. He's pragmatic. He's got a little bit of Nick Fury to him. In that, a little Nick Fury, a little bit of Thunderbolt Ross, in that, like, he's like, I got to take out these kaiju. And suddenly he finds himself in this position where his only real hope to stop them is also this, like, untrainable dog. And so, these characters really kind of make up the core of 10-Ton Titan Terrier, along with all those kind of crazy monsters that Ornella Greco and I created. many of whom are sort of love letters to the great kaiju of iconic films like Godzilla or King Kong, or Mothra, just to kind of name a few. But yeah, I really kind of wear my influences proudly on my sleeves. I think Pokemon is certainly like a big influence, and just the way that we can kind of go crazy with some of these monster concepts, and sort of giving them their own unique abilities and their own unique kind of concepts. But ultimately, the whole thing really is about not just the action, but it is that sort of heartfelt journey with Sam and Holly, and sort of the trials and tribulations that go on with that. I just feel like dogs, even though they can't speak, they do have so much personality, and terriers especially. They really, for being only like a foot tall, they certainly have big dog personality, and a lot of big sense of humor, a lot of mischievousness, and ultimately, a lot of stubbornness. And I think that's like a really cool headspace to try to explore, particularly when you're dealing with a character that doesn't speak, or only speaks and barks. Finding ways to kind of highlight that characterization through action, through emotion, through expression. And that's something that Ornella Greco does so beautifully well.
So do you have a favorite Pokemon?
Oh man. Yeah. Haunter. The design is just like so killer. I think he's the coolest design out of all the Pokemon. But also, if we're talking about like usefulness, I'd probably say Zapdos.
Psyduck.
You can do a lot with the Zapdos. Anyway, that's me getting way too into the nerd weeds.
That's okay.
But I'm also a big Arcanine fan, and I think maybe there's a little bit of Arcanine in this book as well.
Okay.
So tell us about your the artist who you're working with, and how you guys got connected. Or
Ornella Greco is just one of the best collaborators I've ever worked with. She's so incredibly talented. And she and I have been working on this book for a number of years at this point. I want to say at least, I think we've been working together probably since 2020, and we only wrapped up production on the book end of last year. So we worked on this for at least a few years. I found her on Twitter, and I was immediately blown away by just her sense of style, how much personality she has in her kind of cartoony sort of style, and her use of color is very beautiful. And so I remember reaching out, not really knowing anything other than what I had seen online. And I remember asking, her if she had any interest in this, and finding out that she also has a dog who I believe is part Terrier. And so Ornella really was like a kindred spirit in this whole process. And just, I've been very fortunate over the course of my career that I've always been able to kind of find my way towards really talented artists. And I think Ornella is she really raises the bar incredibly high. She's such a gracious and patient collaborator, but she also adds so much of it, so much to the mix herself.
Mm-hmm.
She would make these amazing choices, particularly with Holly, seeing how expressive she is. And she's the perfect collaborator for this book. There's no better artist that I could imagine to take on 10-ton Titan Terrier, and to see the range that Ornella has, not just these kind of like cute or funny moments involving Sam and Holly, but also the larger than life Pacific Rim mecha versus kaiju action, which she does so well in such a way that I feel like it doesn't shy away from like the appeal of a battle mech anime, but at the same time is done in such an accessible way that kids of all ages will be able to say, oh, like, yeah, this is cool. Like, like I've said before, like if you're watching The Incredibles, then you're perfectly suited for 10-ton Titan Terrier. And I think so much of that has to do with the amazing visual tone that Ornella has brought to the book. She's really just a one in a million. And I hope that when people read this book, that more and more people decide to hire her for the direct market.
Yeah, and is she coloring it too?
She is. All the art for Terrier is 100% Ornella, and then paired up with Justin Birch, who lettered The Devil Wears My Face. Justin is just the real linchpin for all the storytelling, making sure that every line really connects. And so, yeah, Justin is just a wonderful, tireless collaborator. I'll work with him anytime, any place. And so having him kind of like carry this book that really was my personal baby, I wouldn't have trusted that to just anybody, but Ornella and Justin really, they really took it seriously, and they delivered such a beautiful book as a result.
And I guess I know you've done other stuff with Mad Cave.
Yeah.
What makes the paper cuts imprint the perfect way or place for this book? Because we've talked to a lot of their of the creators from there, and it's a great line, and it's
Yeah. It's one of those things that Mad Cave has been such a wonderful home for me. Mark London and Chris Fernandez have been just amazingly supportive people in terms of my career for a very long time, dating back to my first sets of books. And so, having worked with them on The Devil That Wears My Face, I've built up a really good relationship with that company. And so this book, though, it was a long time coming. I had lunch with Mike Martz, who, editor-in-chief over at Mad Cave at San Diego Comic-Con. I think it was like 2 years ago. And I've known Mike for a very long time. He was my intern supervisor at DC when I had just graduated from college. And so, and Mike has really been there kind of every step of my career. He edited my book Scout's Honor at Aftershock, and, really took the lead on editing The Devil That Wears My Face. And so as we were having lunch, we were sort of batting around ideas. And I said, I have this book that I've been working on. I don't know if Mad Cave would have any interest in this. And I showed him, I showed him my phone, and I showed him the first issue of Terrier, which had already been drawn, lettered, ready to go. I was ready to self-publish the book out of spite if nobody else was going to take it. And I remember Mike looking at my phone and being like, I really like this art. Would you mind if I kind of ran this thing up the ladder? And, Mad Cave had just recently purchased Paper Cuts. And so they've been looking, just like they have for the standard line, they're really trying to expand and grow the Paper Cuts imprint. And so having a publisher that I know is so thoughtful and caring about their books, like Mad Cave. I mean, there really isn't another publishing house like them in the direct market. I've worked with many of them. Everyone is, I think, very enthusiastic about all the books. They don't treat them like statistics. And so, and I think also their bookstore presence, I think, is very robust for a publisher their size. And I think that's something that's very important to me for a book like this, is that, is making sure that kids can actually read it. And so it was really nice for Paper Cuts to offer us this home for this book, because as much as I would have self-published it or kickstarted it on my own, it is really nice to know that it's going to be available forever, and it's going to be out there with a dedicated book distributor. And so I consider myself very fortunate to be working with Paper Cuts, and they've been very supportive of this book, and have really understood the vision kind of from the jump. And our editor Adam Walenta has been just amazing. It's sort of just making sure that the book itself looks nice. So just a really great team to be working with. I've said it to Mad Cave many times, but I'll work with them as long as they'll have me, because they really do kind of put their money where their mouth is, and they really go the extra mile to support and promote the books.
So do you have maybe more 10-ton Titan Terrier? I swear I'm going to
TTT
without stopping.
Quadruple T.
At some point.
They're never say never. I've certainly got a few ideas in the back pocket for more. It's one of those things that this is my first true all ages book, and so part of me kind of wants to see how does that affect things. I talk about writing for the convention, in that I don't necessarily write for the traditional Wednesday Warriors. I mean, I'm glad that they read my books, but for me, I bounce every idea off my wife, who is not a comics fan, is not grown up reading all this stuff. And she's really my litmus test. If she can understand what's going on, if a civilian can understand this, then, that's all, then it's clearly accessible enough for, to be able to hand to somebody at a convention. And that's what I love about cons is that, it's not the Wednesday Warriors. It's a lot of people who are lapsed readers, or maybe somebody who's never read anything and is just kind of browsing based on vibes. And so having something like Terrier to be able to hand to any reader and say, hey, like, maybe this can be your on-ramp, particularly for younger readers. And so I want to see how that goes, just in terms of like, when these young readers read it, are they going to immediately then say, I want more? Because then, we're going to have to, I think, strike while the iron's hot on that. So much of it is dependent on just like what my workload is looking like and what Ornella's workload is looking like, because I would never want to do another one of these books without her. I think this is just as much her baby as it is mine. But there's a few other ideas. I think with this book, being so heavily focused on a dog mech, I think it would stand to reason of what would happen if you have a cat, or a rabbit. I think you could kind of expand that base a little bit. So, I think for me, the thing about writing something like Terrier is that there's so many kids who do have a dog. And so they can really kind of project themselves into this book. Feeling that kind of that sense of love and loyalty and protectiveness of a pet. It would be great to kind of expand that, I think, across pet lovers of every type of genre.
That's pretty awesome.
The Robo Pet League.
That's right.
Yeah, that would be great.
Like, forget we three. We've got a Terrier.
That's right. We've got a Terrier. Oh, look. We got a pup who's a guest star.
Mine's over here trying to snooze out.
Mine's barking at the delivery man in the other room.
That's what they do. That's what they do.
Yeah.
So David, what else do you have going on right now?
Boy, I've been keeping busy. As we're talking right now, Space Ghost Volume 2 is kicking off. Our second issue just dropped today. Space Ghost meets an old flame from his past, the thief known as the Eclipse Woman. And the great thing about doing this second volume with artist Jonathan Lau, who's just a superstar and a juggernaut and just an amazing collaborator. Our first year of Space Ghost stories was all about kind of building around the Council of Doom and building around this big conspiracy from RoboCorp, leading to our big climactic three-parter with the AI known as Ultima. And the thing is when I was watching the original episodes of Space Ghost to do all the research before I started writing, I was so struck by what a great stacked bench of villains that Space Ghost has. Like, it's right up there with like Batman or Spider-Man, that there's like a million cool rogues that you can each that have their own very specific design and concept, and you can do just really cool and interesting things. Space Ghost being sort of like Batman meets the Mandalorian, you can tell a lot of stories organically in that framework. And so I said to myself, as I was writing the first year, if we got the opportunity to do more, there are a lot of cool villains that I haven't had the chance to play with yet. Some that have a little bit more of almost like Silver Age kind of inspirations to them. Some people like the Toymaker, Eclipse Woman, Tarko the Terrible, all cool villains, but all that are like just, even one step crazier than the iconic Council of Doom. And so when Dynamite approached me towards the tail end of our first year and said, this book's been doing really well for us, do you have it in you to do another year? I said, actually, we've got a lot of cool villains.
As a matter of fact.
And so, this is really about, of course, when you're doing, a second year of stories, you have to figure out ways, how can you kind of escalate the conflict, both personal and external, but in a way that doesn't throw out the baby with the bathwater in terms of like sacrificing the core formula that made the book a success to begin with. Space Ghost, to me, beyond all the high flying spectacle and fireworks, it really is a found family story. It's the story of Space Ghost as a widower, finding these 2 orphan kids and bringing them into his orbit and training them as his sidekicks, and sort of each one kind of healing the other one into this like kind of found family unit. And so, spoilers for anyone who did not read Space Ghost Annual #1, which kind of was the end of year 1 leading us into year 2. For me, the core fantasy of Space Ghost is it's from the kid's perspective. It's this idea of like, I'm going to go to space and I'm going to save the universe and I'm going to fight, robots and pirates and what have you. And so we wanted to turn that fantasy on its head by introducing a new character, Dr. Henry Contra, who is in our continuity, he's the kid's maternal grandfather, long estranged from the family. And once he's learned that his grandchildren, his only family left, managed to survive, he wants to bring them back. And so this idea of like, even this cool sci-fi fantasy, what happens when the parents decide to bring you home, that becomes kind of a core conflict that really kind of drives the engine for year 2 personally. It's very much, for eagle-eyed fans of Space Ghost mythology, they might recognize the name of Dr. Contra as the villain known as the Antimatter Man. And that's, I think, something we're going to be building to over the course of year 2, is this idea of sort of Dr. Contra being kind of our Harvey Dent of this run, of somebody who, at first is an interloper in Space Ghost world, but then somebody who kind of becomes, a little bit of a grudging ally. And then what happens when everything just hits the skids, and what happens to Jane and Jace as a result of all this, what happens when they finally get this other family and it's snatched away from them. And sort of bookending all of this is sort of a bigger, greater, more cosmic threat in the form of Tempest the Time Master, who has been attracted to Space Ghost, has been drawn to him based on some time travel shenanigans that happened in our first year of storytelling. And, no good deed goes unpunished. And in this case, Tempest is hunting down Space Ghost for reasons of his own. And so, a big theme of this series of year 2, it's enemies from the past and the future kind of coming to haunt Space Ghost in the present. And so Tempest is really kind of the linchpin of all of that. And, by the time our second year is done, he's going to put Space Ghost, Jan, Jason, Blip through, I think, the toughest gauntlet of their lives. But, it's just a fun series. Jonathan Lau is just doing the work of his career on this book. And I just love the characters. I talk a lot in interviews now about like, once you get busy, in this business, you want to try to find books that feel natural to you. It's not like at the beginning of your career where you will say yes to things, even if you're not sure about it. You'll twist yourself into knots to try to make the thing work because you start proving yourself.
Right.
I think now I consider myself fortunate enough that I think I've built enough of a track record that I can start to say, well, like, does this feel natural to me? Does this feel like something that I can sort of efficiently and effectively, put out on a regular basis? And I feel like Space Ghost is that book for me. Like, I could write these characters in my sleep. I know their voices kind of like the back of my hand. And I know that if you dropped any one of them in a particular situation, I kind of have a sense of how each one might react based on their own individual strengths and weaknesses and personalities. So it's just been a dream book to work on. It's so nice to see that fans continue to support this series. And, I think this is kind of the dark victory to year 1's Long Halloween. So I'm very excited for people to see kind of what we have in store for that book. And then, of course, I've got Captain Planet and Speed Racer as well. I didn't expect to be the cartoon guy, but it's just sort of how the cookie crumbled last year. But we're reaching sort of the end game of our big origin arc for Captain Planet. Issue 5 comes out next week. Our penultimate issue for that arc. And yeah, it's been a really fun book to get to kind of reimagine the Planeteers through the lens of 2025, to kind of figure out, ways to patch up certain, maybe inconsistencies in the original series that people weren't really paying attention to because it was 1989 and it was targeted for kids. And sort of figuring out a way to circle the square, but also how to like double down on the politics and the sense of diversity and inclusion that the original Captain Planet stood for. It's been great. It's X-Men meets Avatar: The Last Airbender, and just getting to really kind of dig into these very distinct personalities of all the characters. It's been a real treat. I think out of all my books, I think Captain Planet might be the one that's flown under the radar a little bit. And I think that's just because of the release schedule with everything with Diamond. But I couldn't be prouder of that book. Amon Casalos is doing just amazing work. He's kind of he's got a little bit of a Gary Frank by way of like Steve Dillon kind of tone to his art style. Very expressive, great with the action, but also amazing with the sort of the character acting and the drama. So yeah, that's been a really fun book to work on. Be sure to pick up issue 5 next week. And then yeah, Speed Racer has been great. Our spin-off book Racer X just came out today by Mark Russell and Nuno Plati, so be sure to pick that up. But similar to Space Ghost, that book has been like Rocky in a race car, just like a really fun book. It's very different than Space Ghost technically, because it's my one non-superhero book. It very much is a sports drama with some kind of crime undertones. But David Tinto is just drawing the book so beautifully, the way that he's able to convey speed and motion and intensity. That was the challenge I kind of put on myself when I took on this book, is doing a 15-issue run where there's a car chase in every issue. How do you make them feel different?
How do you top yourself with each issue?
Well, I'm in the middle issue 6 right now as we speak, and it's been great. Just kind of like figuring out like different enemies for Speed to face, and just really following him on his hero's journey. In terms of figuring out like he's Hamlet in a race car in a lot of ways. Big emotions,
different ways for his car to break down.
Yeah, just a lot of brooding, a lot of lessons to learn. He's a prodigy who still has a long way to go. And so seeing the way that he kind of plays off his supporting cast, Trixie, who is the owner of the race car team that winds up taking him on, his father, Pops, who has a heart attack in our first issue. And so Speed has to go on this quest to win the championship so he can pay for Pops' heart transplant. Even the mysterious Racer X, even his kid brother, Spritle. Seeing the Speed kind of learn from his supporting cast and also learn from his enemies, his rivals. That's really fun for me. And I think that kind of scratches a different kind of itch for me as a writer. So those books have been keeping me busy, and then gearing up for, we're planning on doing, knock on wood, our third and final Kickstarter for the OZ.
I was going to ask you about that.
We have art done in that book officially. So I'm just doing a final lettering pass on that to give to our amazing letterer, DC Hopkins, and then we'll be off to the races on that Kickstarter. So it's been a long time coming. It's just one of those things that the book has been written, but just, it's just getting the art together. Life sometimes gets lifey. But Ruben Rojas has done such an amazing job on it, and Whitney Kogar has really just like elevated it, all of his pages to just an amazing Ringo Award winning level. So just having that team together, I know people have had to wait on that book, and I know some of that is also just not that I've had anything to write on that book. It's been written for years, but just I've having had other books to promote. I didn't want to cannibalize the OZ as a result. So it's been sort of a little bit of a tricky guessing game especially with all the Diamond stuff that happened this year that kind of blew up my schedule for the year. Figuring out what's a good runway that I can focus solely to the OZ and its promotion. So we're hoping that'll come sooner versus later, because it's been such a labor of love, that book. And I'm so proud of it, and the Kickstarter community has been so amazingly supportive and wonderful and patient for this third installment. So I want to make sure that what we give them is 100% worth the wait.
So, and like, you just gave me a lot to think about with all of that.
Yeah.
So, well,
I went on a full monologue.
But the thing that no, that's fine. The more our guests talk, the less we have to do. But in all seriousness, you've got all these great books coming out that are all very different from one another, tonally, structurally, character-wise, etc. How do you, as a writer, as a professional, keep from overlapping or letting the books dilute unto themselves, if that makes sense?
Boy, it's a good question, and I guess to break it down into two answers, as far as like overlap, luckily I think these books are very different in terms of like their tones and their concepts and their genres and even their overall goals. While I'm always trying to kind of give readers that emotional hit, for every issue. These books are very different animals, which is great because it means that when I have to cycle in between each of them, I'm using different kind of muscle groups, which is,
Sure.
I think I remember being in a similar kind of workload a couple years back when I was writing Moon Knight, City of the Dead, and my Punisher miniseries, and The Devil That Wears My Face concurrently. And that was a little trickier because, those were three books that kind of operated in a similar wheelhouse, sort of this gritty, street level, brooding, male lead hero. And so it became, a real challenge of figuring out, okay, what's different about these books? And how do I lean extra heavy into the differences so they don't feel too much the same? I'm in a position now where everything feels very different. Space Ghost being sort of this like high flying sci-fi superhero. And knowing that it's the family drama with Space Ghost and the kids meets the villain of the week. And so that's like a formula I've got down pretty well pat. Whereas Captain Planet is sort of, instead of doing the done in one stories, we're doing kind of a big sort of old school kind of like big arc for that. And it's a big team ensemble book that's set very much rooted in New York City in the year 2025. So that kind of is a very different kind of speed. And then Speed Racer, because it's a whole different genre, the tone is very different. Knowing that David Tinto, that his work is so cartoony compared to the other artists I work with, I know that that's going to have like a very distinct vibe. And also knowing that we're leaning so heavily into the races of it all, that's sort of a very different wheelhouse. And so, you do, juggling those three books, it's actually good for me in terms of my mental headspace, because that way I'm not sort of like leaning so heavy into one tone or mode that like it gets difficult, that I get worn out. I think in terms of like the oversaturation though, that's I try to figure out on a week to week basis. I know, in recent weeks I've had the very fortunate champagne problem of having like a book release out like every week for the last like I don't know, it's felt like a month. And I know that I've got another month of continuous releases. And I have to remind myself that this is the best, like this is, being able to say like, I'm here, I'm consistently doing work, and it's work that I feel really good about. Sometimes it can be a little exhausting, but it's always, the best kind of exhausting. And I think for me, it's just trying to just kind of do my best to, when a book comes out, give that book the focus, and just knowing that like it's spinning a lot of plates, it's juggling a lot of balls in the air, and you just kind of, beyond that, you just kind of ride the wave as best you can. Knowing that I think the big lesson I've learned as a comic book creator is that there are so many things that are not in your control. There's so many things completely out of your control. And I certainly learned that, you know, in other ways, just with the diamond of it all this year, you know, having books be delayed over the course of that. And so, you know, comics is a contact sport, and if you can't kind of roll with those punches, you better pick a different field. So I feel like I've been really fortunate just to have the books that I have, and to see that people seem to be responding to them. I really do feel like, you know, I've been working with kind of these indie publishers, you know, between Dynamite and Mad Cave, and I feel like we're really punching out of our weight class with these books. And so that's all I could really ask for. You know, people, the fact that people seem to be responding so well to the books, that means everything to me.
Sure. Chad?
So if you know, of all the books you're working on now, if they came to you and said you got to pick one, then one of them. Which one are
Oh
we
no,
picking?
I
Oh,
couldn't.
don't make him choose his baby.
I couldn't choose between my kids. I think, you know, it was one of those things that earlier in the year, you know, I was writing my cable miniseries as well over at Marvel, and so there was a couple of months where I was writing all 4 books at once. That was certainly me kind of pushing my luck and my limits a little bit in terms of my bandwidth. But I think I did that to myself because all of these books felt like, you know, those were opportunities I couldn't say no to. Like those, and not in terms of I feel pressure to do it, in terms of, I think I can do something really cool with these books. And so, yeah, I don't think there's any way that I could choose between them, because it really is kind of like choosing between your kids. Each of these books has such a distinct personality to them, and I get something different out of all of them. And so I think the idea of having to pick only one, I think would be very sad. And so I don't think that's a choice I can make.
Now, are you working on anything?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Chad.
Can we expect anything along the lines of The Devil That Wears My Face? Kind of.
Oh man, you know, never say never. Alex Cormack and I already kind of have an idea of what we want to work on next, and we are talking with a publisher about it presently. So yeah, you know, so much of it is determined based on like just what my workload is and Alex's workload. But I love working with Alex Cormack. He is one of the most gifted artists I've ever worked with. Such an amazingly talented and gracious collaborator. So pretty much the moment we finished with Devil That Wears My Face, I immediately kind of pitched him another idea that he seemed game for. So yeah, it's just a matter of kind of fitting it into the schedule. You know, knock on wood, maybe we'll be able to talk about something next year. But yes, stay tuned. But yes, Alex and I, we definitely want to work together again. And I have a horror idea with his name all over it.
Oh, perfection. So what I was going to say is kind of the opposite direction of where Chad was going with his question is, what character at DC would you like to write the most? And don't say Batman, because everyone's
boy, there's a few. You know, I would love to write Shazam. I love that character. I would love to write the Flash is another one that would be, I think, really fun, and I think could be kind of like a nice like riff on like what I've been doing in Space Ghost. I do think those characters share some DNA. Lobo is another one that I think could be fun. Dr. Fate is another one that I would have a lot of fun with. Etrigan, the demon would be. Etrigan, fun fact, is actually the very first pitch I ever tried writing.
Really?
For Etrigan. So he's a character that's near and dear. And then the Suicide Squad. I know that's a cheat because that's a team and not a character, but Suicide Squad or like old school villain Thunderbolts, that feels like a missing food group for me. I would love to write a villain book. So that one, what I wouldn't do to write the Suicide Squad. So
who would be on your squad
going right now. So there you go, DC.
Yeah. Call your congressman, write DC. Tell him you want me to write a Suicide Squad. I would be on that, you know, with a bullet. It'd be great.
Who would be on your squad?
DC's got to pay me first. Like, I'm going to reveal that. But I've given that one a lot of thought, and so I think there's a lot of fun characters that you could pull for that.
Well, okay, Chad.
Are you doing any conventions this year? Or are you hitting the convention
Oh, I've got
circuits?
2 more conventions this year. I'm going to be at Los Angeles Comic Con. It's just in my backyard. I believe that's in a couple of weeks. Yes, it's in about 2 weeks. So I will be there all weekend for that. And then I'll be at New York Comic Con in October. So be sure to find me at either of those. I'll be signing as many books as I can. But yeah, I love both of those shows. So I'm excited to catch up with everybody there.
Awesome. So do you find it interesting, because your background is working in comics journalism, but do you find it interesting being on the other side of the coin as a creator at a con, being the guy that everyone's looking to talk to now and get interviews with?
Well, that's very kind of you.
Especially when this guy comes up to him and goes, "Hey, let's talk."
I feel like my time in comics journalism, it was a great boot camp for me. Not necessarily in the way that I think a lot of people might think. I think there's maybe a misconception that people say, oh, if you do comics journalism, you get like an easy in at the publishers, and that was certainly not my experience of it. In fact, quite the opposite. I think I had not only did I maybe ruffle a few feathers with some of the, I thought, even-handed reviews I'd written, but I think also I think there was this feeling of, oh, if he could do the job, he would have done the job already. And I think that's a little misconception about me and my history, is that I never went into this thinking, oh, I'm going to write comics. If anything, at first I thought I wanted to be an editor. And then I realized that editors do all like the worst part of the job and none of the fun parts. And so I think editors deserve a Purple Heart for everything they do. But the thing that comics journalism was so helpful for was not only sort of forcing me to learn the lay of the land, what publishers are out there, what books are they putting out, what's the talent that's out there right now. But it really forced me to kind of read books, these comics a little deeper, to figure out, like, not just, oh, do I like this or don't I like this, but to really kind of articulate why and to really show my work. And that really kind of helped me in terms of building my toolbox as a writer, is that I would say, oh, I really like the way that, say, Rick Remender paces action. Okay, like I can kind of like file that away, or I really like the structure, the pacing of like the Babs Tarr Batgirl run. Instead of figuring out, okay, that's adding that, or Devin Grayson, her run on Batman Gotham Knights, which I think is like a Rosetta Stone for everything I write. Like seeing like how she's able to kind of balance like this kind of this action, but also kind of this dark, heartbreaking, brooding emotion. And then you also learn like things, you read books that you don't like, and you kind of figure out, okay, like, maybe I'm not the biggest fan of decompression, for example. So I tend not to write in a particularly decompressed way. So I think, comics journalism was really helpful in terms of honing my voice. And I still kind of like turn back to that side of myself whenever I'm working on a script, particularly whenever I'm working on the lettering pass. But even when I'm looking at the art, I say, like, if this wasn't my book, if I had to review this book, what would I say about this moment? And oftentimes that kind of pushes me to go the extra mile. But yeah, I think, I think there's been a long and illustrious history of comics journalists, going pro. You see like Gail Simone, you see Kelly Thompson, Ryan K. Lindsay, I think Warren Ellis did stuff. Paul Levitz did fanzines before,
Sure.
he did all that.
Quite famously.
Yeah, I do think that there's sort of this long history of comics fan journalists turning pro. I never really thought that was going to be me. I never even really kind of gave myself permission to do that for a very long time. I grew up in the Midwest. I had no creative role models. It just so happened that I was living in New York. I was working for CBS at the time, working in their publicity and PR division. And I wanted to work in more creative fields, and everyone said, well, you got to move to Los Angeles. You know, you got to get a Hollywood assistant job. And I said, well, maybe if I wrote like a short comic, maybe it could kind of show that I know how to break down a story. And, you know, that turned into Spencer and Locke. And it was sort of as I was working in my 9th month of my horribly abusive Hollywood assistant job and being miserable. And then people liked that book that suddenly the light bulb went off like 16 months later, where I was like, wait a minute, what if I just like do this and I cut out all the nonsense? And so I kind of tripped and fell into this job, but it really is, it's the astronaut job. It's the job that was so cool and exciting and admirable that I never considered that maybe it could be me. And so it's been a wild trip being able to have this job. And I kind of constantly am sort of like, is the simulation glitching? I feel like so grateful and lucky and fortunate to have the kind of job that I do. And so even the days that are challenging, even the days that I'm exhausted, I've never had a bad day in this business. And I so, you know, every day I wake up feeling lucky, and that's what kind of gets me putting out my page count for the day.
So to kind of step back, were there any young adult graphic novels that you kind of dove into when you were working on 10-ton Titan Terrier?
Yeah, you know, I think there were certainly a few that I really enjoyed. There was the Amulet series. I really dug that. Cleopatra in Space has been a favorite for a long time. Nimona is another one that I've really enjoyed. You know, a big influence really for me, honestly, you know, the Pokemon anime was a big one. You know, that dynamic of Ash and Pikachu, I think, is very much the DNA of this book, and sort of the crazy monster designs. And, you know, honestly, like another big influence, like I've talked about it before, you know, I mean, Pacific Rim, like I remember seeing that movie in the theater with my brother for the first time, and I did not expect a whole lot out of it. I think we were just like looking to kill some time. And I was like, oh, what's this movie with the robot? I'll check it out. And I was transfixed watching that movie. As somebody who loves doing mashups, that was like the quintessential mashup movie for me. And so the idea of kind of being able to do something in that vein, but something that readers of all ages can you know, appreciate, that was very attractive to me. And so yeah, it's one of those things that, like, I don't know, whenever I talk about influences, it's very rarely coming from other comics. You know, I'm kind of a movie head. And not like in like the pretentious way, but I'm just like, I like movies. And like, so if I really like Face Off, I might do a book that riffs on Face Off, you know, or, you know, if I really like the Fast and the Furious, like, you know, or, you know, I might do a riff, you know, on that, you know, in Speed Racer somewhere. So yeah, you know, I just try to kind of draw in a lot of different influences from a lot of different places, and then kind of throw it into a blender. And I think that kind of pop culture infused kind of storytelling, that seems to be the thing that speaks well for me, speaks the most to me, I should say. And that's served me pretty well, I think, particularly when you're trying to sell things at a convention. You know, I'm trying to be the Baskin Robbins. I want a flavor for everybody. And so being able to say most of my high concepts are sort of weird high concepts that you laugh at first, but then it kind of sinks its hook into you. And you're like, well, wait, what does that mean? What is, you know, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? That's funny. Wait, what does that book look like? Like, what's Face Off meets The Exorcist look like? What's Pokemon meets Pacific Rim look like? And so that's kind of been, I think, my bread and butter as far as my creator-owned work is concerned, is that I'm trying to make the hand sell. And the best way to do that is to kind of make readers, you know, catch them off guard, make them laugh, make them a little amused by that this thing exists, and then make them a little curious to figure out just where the rabbit hole goes.
Very nice. So, looking ahead, I mean, I'm sure you've got stuff on the boil. Do you have anything coming out soon that that's been announced that you can talk about yet?
Yeah, well, honestly, those 5 books have been sort of been my life for the foreseeable, particularly because Space Ghost and Speed Racer have such a long runway to them.
Mhm.
Space Ghost, I've got at least another 10 issues scheduled to come out, and they're we're sort of having some discussions now about maybe there might be some other angles that we can kind of take that series even beyond that.
He gets a
And
talk show.
yeah, it's a talk show. Um,
Season
you know,
3.
and Speed Racer, I've only about a third of the way through my run
Mhm.
on that.
Hmm.
So yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think between all those things, it's sort of just been keeping my hands full with all that. But there are
Sure.
definitely a lot of things on my to-do list that I want to work on, and there's a lot. I've got a list as long as my arm as far as superhero stuff that I would love to do. That I gotta start knocking on doors as far as that's concerned. But yeah, I mean, I can say, like Cable, for example, my Cable miniseries that is out, the collected edition is out 2 weeks from today, actually. So Cable Love and Chrome, you can pick that up at your local comic shop. Yeah, it's just busy has been sort of my word for the last year and a half to 2 years, and it's
Mhm.
been wonderful. And so
Okay.
the thing that's
Say
so
that's
exciting,
good.
yeah, it's wonderful. It keeps it helps me pay my rent and keep my puppy fed and kibble. Uh, but also just there's something about this industry that I've come to learn, which is don't get me wrong, like I enjoy being able to call my shot every so often. Captain Planet is a book that I've been lobbying for 10 years, but there's something kind of nice about especially with licensed books. You don't really know what's coming. The editors will sort of say, I have this license and I think you could do a good job at it. And that's really cool, because then I think, before you start trying to anticipate things, you're kind of like put on the spot and you have to think of something like right there, right now, that really speaks to, I think, where you're at in terms of your abilities at that very moment, rather than sort of locking yourself in when you're less experienced and when you don't, like calcify it into an idea, when you could just keep yourself limber for something really cool down the line at the height of your abilities. So that's sort of where it took me a little while to learn that lesson. But that's something I've really been leaning into is just, I try to let my current work speak for itself. And Sebastian Paris is a really talented artist. And I think of his Twitter bio all the time where he says, work until you don't have to introduce yourself. And I think that's a really great way to kind of operate in this business, and that's certainly something that I'm trying to do is just kind of let these 5 amazing books speak for themselves, and then the future is wide open from there.
Man, that's excellent. Well, and I mean, can't complain with what you got going on either. So I mean,
No, not at all, not at all. I've been very fortunate that I've been able to work, not only just on these 5 titles, but these 5 titles that I've really been able to put my whole self into. I want to give Dynamite and Mad Cave a ton of credit in that, they've given me a ton of latitude on all of these books, to really kind of like explore them in whatever way that I think like is the most engaging and the most appealing and the most accessible. And that's not always the case. And that's not to throw stones at any publisher or for any
yeah,
books.
right,
It's
right.
just, there are different books that are operating in different frameworks that you kind of have to work around, what else is going on, particularly if you're doing stuff in a shared universe. I think, being able to kind of have that kind of hands-on ability to really kind of call my own shots a little bit. It's a real gift as a writer. And I think it really has allowed me to deliver some of my best work. I think ultimately at the end of the day, this business is really sort of a pendulum swing of how well can you play with others, but also what ideas can you bring to the table. And I think ultimately sort of one leads to the other. But I think always being able to hone that muscle of coming up with your own ideas to really take the biggest swing possible, I think that's the thing that ultimately the readers deserve.
Yeah.
And so I feel really fortunate that I've been able to have a full slate of books that I've really been able to kind of put my own stamp on, to take my own biggest, most personal swing on it, and just try to deliver the best possible product without having to make any sort of compromise on it. And so, yeah, I consider myself very lucky to have the books that I have, and for them to have the responses that they've had. So, yeah, excited to see what readers think of what we've got down the pike.
I'm sure we'll be talking more about it in the future.
Yeah.
All right. Well, David, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Oh, it's my
And
pleasure.
thank you for the great comics that you're putting out.
Oh no, thank you guys so much for taking the time to talk about them and for supporting them. I know that you guys and all the watchers at home, you guys have a lot of comics to choose from, and so I'm always grateful when people give us a shot and give our books a chance. And yeah, just know that I'm going to the mat every week to deliver the best damn story I can every single time, and so. But having support of readers like you, it really does make a huge difference and a huge impact. So thank you for all the support.
Absolutely. So, David, again, thank you for hanging out with us tonight. We certainly appreciate it every time you stop by. Chad, who do we have coming in next week?
We have a twofer next week.
Oh, boy.
Monday, we have Jimmy Palmiotti stopping by to talk about his Kickstarter and probably some other stuff. And then on Thursday, we are talking Conan with Jim Zub.
Nice.
Yes.
Well, that's a great twofer. Two really talented, smart, and nice guys.
Can't go wrong with that. So thank you all for listening tonight. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for sharing and helping get the word out about our silly little show that we put our hearts into every week. Get out there in the world and do some good, okay? Support local art, support local comic stores, support local music. Just whatever you do out there in the world, do it for the right reasons and don't be a dick. Thank you so much for listening. David Pepose has been our guest tonight, and you can find us at comic-watch.com. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.